sec. Just getting this. And okay, great. So everyone, I'm going to take you into this lovely presentation here I have here. And I'm trying to get it off my, no, I don't want that. Sorry, I hit some little button. I don't want you to have to see all this extra fluff. So, all right, I'll figure that out. Hi, Samar. Great to, oh, lovely to see some of you dear ones from different walks of life. Hi. So great to see you from Berlin. So we've got a lovely gathering here, and I know some of you from all over the world. You know, it would just be really lovely is if everybody could just put in the chat, because I'm just sensing the real globalness of this call. If everyone could just put in the chat your first name and where in the world you are viewing this from. It would just be really lovely to have that. Thank you. And let's see here. No, I think, you know, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can see these. Yes. Okay, so Nora, great. Kathy from the US, New York, California, New Jersey. Susan, great. Some are from New Mexico. Normally, who isn't from New Mexico? Fantastic. And we have April from Denver, Babe from Johnson City, Tennessee. Some are in Berlin, Germany, Robin from Gold River, BC, Canada, British Columbia, Nora in South Carolina, Elizabeth in Toronto, Chelsea from Pagosa Springs, Colorado, Rachel from Dubai. I'm in Dubai as well. Diane from New Hampshire, Allison from Kentucky, Holly from Washington State, Nancy from Colorado, and Helise, excuse me if I'm pronouncing your name right, Helise from Bisbee, Arizona. Okay, that's a new town for me. Brilliant, lovely, lovely, lovely to have you all. All right, everyone. So I'm just going to, let's see if I can do that. All right, so, you know, this is a little technology. Normally I have it down on this, but somehow there's a setting on here that I'm not getting. So we're gonna just see the sidebar as well. I'm trying not to make that happen, but it's happening. Actually, I can do it that way. Okay, good. So I'm gonna share my screen again, and we're gonna dive in. And Summer's going to be with me on this in a special way as well. So we're going to, Summer, that's in New Mexico. She's going to be joining me here. So you know, the word triste. So if you can just mute yourself, if you're not already, that will just be really helpful. So the word triste means sad, and then tristeza in Spanish is sadness. And it's that deep place of, so if you're not in their Vigo community, this concept may be new to you. And actually, Samar, could you, sorry, I'm going to have you unmute yourself. Could you just give an introduction to our Vigo, since I know there's some here who are not in our Vigo community, and that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. So this work came about originally, a woman named Rosita Arvigo spent a lot of years in Belize studying with Donaligio Ponti, who is a Hamen, a Maya shaman doctor priest, and it really diligently went deep into traditional healing modalities that range from physical to spiritual, and it exists on a continuum. So as with a lot of indigenous practices, there really isn't a separation between body and mind and psyche. And so one of the things he taught that's been passed down is the spiritual baths or the spiritual healing practices. And so the way that it was explained to me by Rosita and the way that has been shared is that everybody can get afflicted by a spiritual sickness, and they have a lot of emotional corollaries. So fear, susto, is one we went into, grief is another. This category of tristeza, the way that it was shared with me, and it's evolved over time in terms of my personal definition, is some unknowable sense of not belonging, not feeling right, not fitting, and just having this melancholic state that doesn't always have a story. And so in the not knowing of it is an invitation into our sacred wound, because we don't always understand it. we often spend our lives trying to figure it out. And so it's that gift that keeps on giving and taking us to the hardest places. And some of the spiritual sicknesses are non-emotional. Some of them are afflictions of energy or, other people's stuff. But this one feels like an inheritance more than any of the others.
Thank you. And you've segued beautifully into where I'm going to go with this. So thank you so much. As always, you're so articulate, and I just always love listening to you. So thank you so much. So I'm going to just, I like in the way that I present this. So I'm not an RVGO practitioner, but I very much interface with this world and this practice. I have received beautiful healings through Samar in this practice, and it's very dear to me, very, very dear to me. I'm also of Latin background. My father's from Mexico, and so my last name was Gonzalez. So I do speak Spanish. So this practice even more has, I feel connected to it for those indigenous reasons. And so I created a modality, if you will, or a concept. It's not me just only creating it, of course, but in 2014, coming out of some very intense grief of losing a late partner, I realized that at the 4-year anniversary that I had been on a real grieving odyssey. It was an odyssey. And I took Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, I'm going to take you here, stages of grief, which are the 5 stages that most of us are familiar with, and I expanded it. I elongated it. And, as being here with Summer, I would add this word here, as I've been holding, sorry, everyone. As I've been holding this, the preparation of this, really going into the essence of this, in the way that I have tracked this. And it may be a little different, but I feel that what I'm going to offer is going to be still a contribution, and wherever it's not exact, it will still have something to offer here. So whenever we're in deep grief, we can be in anything of a loss or shock to our systems, we go into denial. And then eventually we move into some kind of anger, we bargain, we negotiate, we then feel the betrayal, the guilt, sometimes that guilt as how we betrayed ourselves. And then we're going here, and that's where I'm going to take you now, to the place where there we go, the place where we are going to be tonight. And it's in my map, it's really these 2 territories kind of in and out. And it's that depression or that melancholy, as we've named, and that deep sorrow, that gutted sorrow. It's not just sadness, it's where your whole being, where you're defenseless to it. And once you move through these, then you move into the lighter, more rebirth places. But this place we're going tonight can take years. It can be a whole lifetime experience. And a lot of times, the psychiatric world will call it clinical depression. And it's often missing something because of the lack often of spirituality and other understandings on the more subtle planes of energy. And a lack of deep understanding of some of the more new contributions to psychology. There's an ignorance, an innocent ignorance, but an ignorance to what is really part of this territory. So we're going to explore that. So what is it? Now, the first place, I just want to talk about my definition of depression. And I was very blessed that in the first week of graduate school, an aspect of this was presented to me, and it shaped so much the way I work. And the idea of that is that if we have here, depression is a cocoon, a chrysalis, a dark gestation. So this can go on for years, and you may have had that experience in yourself. You may know family members, or if you're a practitioner, clients you've worked with, where they are battling something. As I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking of a client I worked with many years ago who was adopted. And she was in this for a very long time. And there came a place where she just finally came to an acceptance that all that happened to her in the womb and in the process of being given up for adoption, and what happened to her with her adoptive family, that it was so traumatic that this was going to be a lifelong journey, that she wasn't going to get over it so quickly. I'm thinking of both Israelis or Jewish friends I have, as well as Palestinian friends I have, that both carry the same thing. It's that place where they feel a sense of the despair and the deep sadness for what has happened to their whole people is so overwhelming that it's something that they live with for their entire lives. I'm going to move on to the next place here. And this is a key word that was coined by St. John of the Cross. And he was Spanish, and he was good friends with St. Teresa of Avila in Spain. And it's this place where we feel that we are not connected to any spiritual path at all. We feel like God has forgotten us, God's abandoned us. And it's that phrase from Christianity, "Dear Father, why have you forsaken me?" on the cross, you know. And it's that moment where we've lost all hope, all despair. And when one is riding this, one is living this, you feel that no matter what spiritual practices you do, they just don't penetrate, they don't work. And it's that place of the most profound surrender to hang in there. And this can go on. And some people, it can be a state of crisis for a long time. It can be, this is something, they are functional, but they're holding this at a very deep level. And then what are some of the causes? And Summer, I'm going to ask you to also contribute to this. These are ones that I know that I have worked with, very much in the people that I've worked with. And one is collective trauma. So we would have that with like whole groups of people, like I named Israel or the whole Jewish story or Palestinians, or we could go on, for example, Rwanda and any place, the former Balkan countries. And the list goes on. I mean, there's so many places that on the world that are holding intense collective trauma. We could say that the whole world right now is in a collective traumatic state. But it's being in that. I went through a phase of this for a good couple years where there was pollution in the environment that I was living in. And I couldn't shake it. And I functioned, I was very functional, but I was in a permanent state of profound sadness. And it took so little to create that expression or that release. And I felt a state of a permanent helplessness and hopelessness, deep despair. And so the other is intergenerational trauma. So for example, I have some roots in Ireland. I have a great-great-grandfather that came on one of the famine ships to the United States. And I'm very aware of that lineage. There is profound intergenerational trauma that's been transmitted in every single person through that lineage. I've seen it also on my Mexican side, the same. Interuterine trauma. Interuterine trauma can be, for example, if your mother was pregnant with you and she suffered profound conflict with your father, or if she lost a dear loved one of her parents or someone else during her pregnancy with you, that can be a very profound traumatic experience. And this, by the way, deep loss during the mother's deep loss during her pregnancy very often will create the conditions for this. Now, Summer said sometimes we don't know, and that's also part of the initiation, not knowing. But as psychology becomes more embracing of the quantum theoretical supports as well as epigenetics, we are understanding actually what some of this is linked to. And I'm sure all of you on this call have heard of epigenetics. It's that place where we transmit trauma through the genes, which is quite spectacular. And I'm not going to go into that now. I could. And it involves telomeres, it involves the strands of your DNA. It's fascinating material. And if that is of interest to you, certainly it's a ripe subject online in terms of podcasts, in terms of research. It's brilliant what we're learning about that. But that trauma is transmitted to the fetus, to the child, through its own DNA. And a lot of times it stays dormant. But when a trauma of that same territory gets activated in real time, boom, it wakes it all up. It's like a time bomb that's just ticking. And that's also, there's been a lot of research on those conditions as well. So
May I add some?
please.
I was making notes because I was so activated. The door got activated. Inspired by what you said, Cyntha, and I was just thinking of different cases where I've seen this and just situations. And when we talk about how it impacts groups, so when you talk about Israel and Palestine, or you talk about anywhere where there's been genocide or diaspora, I think you see this extremely in indigenous groups all over the world. And it's an older trauma. So it's like I'm here on very profoundly Native American land, and it's just part of the vernacular every day. I have that at home with Māori people, definitely with First Nations people in Australia, even with my own background of Bedouin people. Like, they're not calling it that, but you can just see there's just an emptiness, like something's not flowing. So that's a huge, and it's being presenced a lot more now. But I think some of it is like it can't just be fixed that easily. And so that's one thing. The other thing was, you see this when we talk about in the womb, trauma is one, but also a sense of maybe not being wanted, or a certain gender being desired, or the parent being surprised in some way. And so that can often go really deep into the psyche. This can be seen in communities where gender is more fluid and less defined. There can sometimes be a sense of not being understood, or not coming in the way that someone else expected you to. You touched on environmental tristeza, Cyntha, and I think that's massive right now. I think we're dealing with a lot of environmental refugees and a lot of people that are grieving land that's disappearing really, really fast, and they don't even have terms to explain it. And then one area I want to go into that's a little bit woo, but it's powerful, is the stuff that comes in before we are this. So whether you believe in past lives, or whether you believe in parallel lives, or you don't believe in any of it, or however it rolls for you, there are some things that aren't just explainable by this personality. I've personally definitely had a lot of those experiences where things bother me and they're not rooted in this time. And then as those visions and things come forward, they make a lot more sense. And so those are just some of the areas that this can manifest. And the last one is, and you've taught me this term, Cyntha, is the shaman of the family, is like the black sheep, or the person who gets recruited to do the healing. I think they often bear the weight of this for everybody. Yeah,
Yep.
that's coming.
Thank you. Let me just put that shaman of the family. Yes, that's something. Absolutely. So they hold that all the way through. And I know some of you on this call may have definitely had that role in your family. Yes. Thank you, Summer. Thank you. So I'm going to skip the next. Wait, let's just come here. Okay, so I just want to talk about different ways of working with this. And, Tristeza, the first key is, and of course, any of you on this call most likely are some version of a practitioner, I trust, or, deeply interested in the healing arts. And one of the things that we have to work with all the time is our own countertransference, meaning where our own material is getting activated. This territory can definitely activate burnout. So we need to even go into this healing trifecta, which I've named on other calls as well. In order to go into this trifecta of being able to presence and be with someone that is going through this, one must have come to some terms of embracing one's own territory of depression, melancholy, despair, hopelessness. And if not, there will be sometimes an impatience, sometimes an irritation, wanting to speed up the process. rather than being able to simply mirror them where they are at, validate them for where they're at, and empathize with what that must be like. And that is the invitation that we all have as practitioners of whatever modality that we're working with, to really work with our own relationship to these different territories, because otherwise it will leak. And also the catch is that when someone is in this state, they are ultra sensitive. They have the highest levels of sensitivity usually. And so they will be aware if there's a place where this territory is just really uncomfortable for you still, and that's okay. And so I've learned, it was interesting, prior to my late partner dying and post my late partner dying, I became a different practitioner. I was initiated when through that grieving process at such a level that I could never even have imagined it. And I wasn't expecting something of that magnitude as young as I was. I was in my 40s still. And that is sometimes the best way, we become the wounded healer in this territory. And so prior to this, let me just say post this, people that are colleagues of mine know what I've gone through. And I have received certain recommendations from other practitioners saying, Cyntha, this is a territory that this isn't my territory. And I've actually received quite a few people that in this, and I know now, I just know because of being initiated myself. So that can be a wonderful thing. Like I've, certain people with certain collective traumas that aren't mine, but I have practitioners that hold that same trauma. Sometimes I've referred them on to that person, knowing that they're going to be mirrored just by the fact that that practitioner knows. They know so deeply. So that's also something to consider here. The next thing is different states of consciousness. Because this world is so nonverbal, it's often pre-verbal. It's of a level of intuition that you feel it. It's that felt sense, but there are no words. It's not like the classic anger or some of the more dramatic emotions. And so it needs the more nonverbal states of consciousness to support us through it. And that, I talked about this before in another call, the beauty of kirtan music. Kirtan music and the arrangement of the music, it's very sacred music, but it's heart music. And the way it's designed, and I'm not a musician, so I don't know enough to tell you what it is, but I know that this is the story with kirtan. It has a way of penetrating the heart, like few other musics, in the manner in which it does, but heal. And I find that in the territory of melancholy, depression, deep sadness, kirtan is one of the most effective music modalities or genres to support profound healing in this territory, in simply the sense of accompanying one, not with the intent to solve it, but to hold space for it and let the natural healing take its course. Breath work is fantastic. It is, to me, one of the #1 modalities to work with these states, because it is so profound, it's so unconscious, it's so corporal. Breath work, and the modality that I'm particularly trained and certified in is holotropic breath work. There's also rebirthing and other breathwork modalities, the Wim Hof. There's all these wonderful modalities that exist now, and it's expanding as we continue as this evolving species really stepping into the Aquarian age. But breathwork has a way of accessing content like nothing else, really. So, and then there's the more, what I wrote, the still methods, it was the Reiki, the more passive methods, where we are simply receiving. So we're not so actively doing something, but we're receiving deep healing. That also includes massage therapy. To just be held, to be allowed to feel that. And because in most of our societal groups, there's that desire to smooth it over, to come on, like I know when I lived in England, when I was around the sun, shall we put on, would you like a cuppa? Would you like a cup of tea? And it's like that was going to solve the problem, every culture has their way of evading, and because it's uncomfortable, it's a territory that is not cheerful and happy. And then lastly, nature is one of the ones, it's that just the infinite wisdom of nature, that unconditional acceptance of nature. And then in that, I would also include animals. That includes pets, that place where there's just that unconditional acceptance. So Summer, I'm sure you've got some other things to add to this. I'm welcome to hear.
Ironically, I think out of all of them, this might be the one that talk therapy is the most helpful for. Is like really deeply, deeply understanding one's patterns in addition to all the embodied practices, because ultimately, like, this is territory you're going to have to navigate alone because it walks with you. But out of everything, like, say just susto or whatever, it's like those states, the spiritual healing and the body based, instantly can shift. This calls for understanding. And I think then there needs to be some kind of rigor and consolidation of the psyche that it can hold it. And so we build that through the body, and then we build that through being reflected and all the things you've said about the ways that space are held.
Brilliant. Summer, that's so astute. And what I also would add to that as a counselor myself is that what you're saying there, Summer, is so important. It comes back to that comprehension, which is on my list after. If we come back here, let me just show you all here the map that I've created here. So here we go. So if you notice, comprehension follows this. And it's that place where we start, it's like we're starting to clear through the woods to say what, and when you're with a counselor or any kind of therapist, and whatever their role is, it could be a coach, whatever their role is, they are sometimes the only one you've ever shared this material with. It's that they are your accompaniment, they're your chaperone into this territory. And they're a lighthouse because there's a place where you can name things and have that unconditional acceptance, as well as, like Summer said, starting to dissect and understand what are the patterns, what are the intergenerational patterns, what is the trauma that nobody speaks about in the family that counselor is willing to completely hold and heal with you and process with you. So thank you, Summer, for naming that. Super important. So let me come back to, oh no, that wasn't it. So I wanted to come back. So Summer, I know I'm going to just bring in these prompts. So it's not going to necessarily be journal prompts, but I'm going to take us through this as a visualization. And then Summer, I know we're going to open this up to the group, and I'm going to let you introduce that. Okay. So let me just take everybody through this. And so if I can just ask you all to close your eyes and allow yourselves to deeply drop in with 3 very deep, extended breaths. Really extending that exhale to really come into a groundedness onto the chair or floor or sofa or bed or wherever you are, the place that is supporting you, allowing yourself to fully surrender and ground into it. And as you are, allowing yourself to acknowledge where you have ever felt a profound sense of despair, extended depression, hopelessness, deep loneliness, deep disconnect, alienation, being so marginal that you feel no one gets you. Some people report when they're in these states that they feel like they're literally from another planet, that they are an extraterrestrial in a terrestrial body, that they don't belong to this world. The disconnect is so deep. And based on some of what Summer and I have both spoken about, And any time where you live that, maybe it's in the past, maybe you've come through it, maybe you're still in it. It doesn't mean you're destined to it your entire life, but you may have had a long patch of it, or just a very profound patch of it. But in the different causes that Summer and I did mention, collective trauma, intergenerational trauma, intrauterine trauma, past lives. Is there any of these different examples being marginalized because of the life path or the soul essence that you are to incarnate into in this life? Being the wounded healer of the family, being the one that feels everything, being the sensitive, the intuitive, that absorbs, that knows, that's the wise one, that's maybe tagged as too sensitive, the crybaby. You hold that place in your family or in your community. And in that state of deep melancholy, deep hopelessness and despair, has there been a gift at any time, if it is already in the past tense, or if it's something that's still going on, it's ongoing, that has been a gift that's been gleaned from this state of being? Whether you, as a more profound practitioner or healer, whether a deeper state of spiritual connection because there's nothing else, whether a deep nodding knowing as you move through the world of suffering and your capacity to extend that compassion to others because you so deeply know. And as you're entering into this portal of this territory, and if there is any grief that you have, or despair that you have lived in the past, or you're currently going through, does the lessons and the experience of that wish to manifest into something into your near future, or perhaps writing about it, blogging about it, incorporating it into your practitioner role? If you're in it now and it's still quite acute, what does it most long for now? Any of the practices that Summer and I contributed. Talk therapy, breath work, music, nature, healing, the more passive kinds of modalities. And then Summer, I'm going to turn this over to you and let you transition us into where we're going to go next.
Thank you, Cyntha. I'm just going to mute you for 1 second because the way it records, if two mics are open, yeah, perfect. So I'd love to open the space in just a second for questions. But before that, it feels really important for me in authenticity to just speak to Tristeza in my own life, because I'm actively making a choice to consciously be with my own. And I think in the sharing of just very briefly the nuggets of this, it might really invite others to come into whatever they need to share or they need to ask. And so I'm in New Mexico. I live in New Zealand. This trip was originally planned to spend time with a person who's very dear to me. And just before coming, there was an emotional rupture that caused them to break all ties. And I actually, ironically, last month sat down and made a list of everybody that's happened with in my life. And there was 15 intimate relationships, including both my grandmothers, um, other close family members, several friends. And I know this sounds horrific, but it's not from a place of me just being like a fighter with them. It's really never ends that way. It's more, it's like the moment that I set a boundary because I'm getting uncomfortable, because of the moment I honor my sensitivity is the moment that the rupture starts to happen. And so this has been such a source of grief and such a source of loneliness that it feels really important now to take this time to be with it and to actually be alone for 30 days on the mountain and just go there, because I realized specifically with this latest iteration, what bound me to this person was a sense that, oh, you really understand my way of perceiving, which is really rooted in energetics. It's like, I'm not alone. You know, when you speak about aliens and feeling like you're from another planet, it was like, oh, you speak the same language as me. And I've waited my whole life to have someone speak the same language as me. And then to have that disappear suddenly really brought up what's underneath, which is my tristeza, which is that I'm essentially alone. And it feels really important. And I'm saying this with a lot of compassion and a lot of professionalism, but it is relevant in what's happened around the transition of the Arvigo Institute and the Abdominal Therapy Collective. Part of the reason it's actually not been quite so difficult personally is because I recognize this as yet another expression of what I'm learning how to do. Is that, okay, I'm here and I have to carry a lot of this by myself. And that was my role in the family with my mother, and that has been my role with all these friends and people. And I think, you know, the pain is quite unbearable sometimes, but then you learn to bear it. And then the gift, and you spoke to this as well, is like, you know, when no one's there at the end, when it got too difficult, it's interesting. A way that I've been able to explain this to people is like, I, for some reason, will just sit in the sandpit, like right till the end. And then stuff comes up for the other person. And that's their pain. And so when everybody else has left the sandpit, it becomes my fault because I'm still there. And that's something I've seen again and again and again. And, you know, the maturity around it is really going, you know, they're lashing out because they're in pain. And you're still there because there's something that propels you to stay there. And I don't know if my medicine is to ever leave the sandpit, but to strengthen myself in it and understand that maybe it is an alone path. Like maybe that's okay, because the gift on the other side of it is my intensive need to share and be connected has really invited a relationship with spirit that's unbreakable, that no one can touch and just keeps growing. And so, you know, while I thought I was coming here for one thing, um, I'm here for something else, which I think is actually a far greater relationship than one you can have with a human being. Um, yeah, so I'm in it, and there are moments that are uh, scratchy, and then there are moments that are highly expansive. And I don't know if this feeling will ever go away or that it ever needs to. So just opening the space to anyone that wants to either share their experience or ask a question. I'm going to stop recording just to protect people's privacy now. So thank you.
And I would also like to encourage everybody to just in your own integrity right now, to hold confidentiality here in terms of everything that's shared here. And